My name is Linda Whitmore. I am 61 years old, and for most of my life I worked as a librarian in the quiet town of Ashford, Vermont. My days were simple. My world was small. I never imagined that one Thanksgiving dinner would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family and about myself. The morning started the way most Thanksgivings do. I woke early, peeled apples for pie, basted the turkey, and set the old dining table I'd used for nearly 30 years. The house smelled of cinnamon roasted herbs and a touch of wood smoke from the fireplace. It felt warm, lived in a reflection of a life built not on wealth, but on care. It had been 2 years since I'd seen my son Daniel in person. He moved to California to launch his tech company, and to my pride and perhaps a little sadness, he became a millionaire at just 36. Clarissa, his wife, accompanied him. She was always gracious, impeccably dressed, and a little hard to read. But I welcomed them both that afternoon with an open heart. I thought we would laugh, share stories, and eat too much pie. I thought the distance and the time would melt away over mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce. But deep down somewhere, I wasn't quite ready to admit I felt the chill of something unspoken hovering between us. And by the time the turkey hit the table, everything I thought I knew would be gone. 2 years is a long time not to see your child, but I told myself it was understandable. Daniel was preparing for his company's IPO. Every call was quick, every message rushed. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who guilt-tripped her son. And Clarissa. She filled in the gaps, texting updates, sending me photos of their travels, always saying Daniel's working so hard, but he's thinking of you. The truth, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? The last time I'd hugged my son was at my husband's funeral. Grief has a strange way of creating distance, even between people who love each other. Since then, my life had quietly shrunk. I worked part-time at the library until my arthritis got worse. I clipped coupons, skipped medications when I couldn't afford them, and told myself it was temporary. Clarissa often messaged to say how much Daniel cared, how he was planning something special for me when things calmed down. So I never asked for more. I never questioned why I still lived in the same drafty house wearing the same threadbare coat through bitter Vermont winters. When they arrived that afternoon, Daniel looked radiant, confident, expensive. His watch alone probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Clarissa was radiant, too cream-colored coat, perfectly styled hair, her usual polished smile. But her eyes... I would remember the way her eyes flickered that day for the rest of my life. We sat for dinner. We made small talk about his business expansion, her volunteer work, their recent trip to Italy. I smiled, nodded, laughed when expected. But as I poured the coffee, I noticed Daniel looking at me with something almost like expectation. And then he asked the question that unraveled my world. Daniel leaned back in his chair, a relaxed smile playing on his lips. His voice was soft, casual, completely unaware of the bomb he was about to drop. "Mom," he said, "how's the hill house I gave you? Do you like it?" I blinked. For a moment I wondered if I'd misheard him. The room around me, the ticking clock, the glow of the fireplace, the steam rising from the pumpkin pie seemed to blur at the edges. "What house?" I asked, setting down the pie server with unsteady hands. Daniel's smile faltered. He glanced at Clarissa, who was suddenly very still beside him. "The house. The one on Hillcrest Lane. 2 years ago. I had it transferred to your name for your birthday. You always said you wanted to live near the hills." My throat tightened. "Daniel," I whispered, "I never received any house." The room fell dead silent. Clarissa slowly stood her manicured hand, brushing invisible crumbs from her lap. She walked toward Daniel, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She placed her hand on his shoulder, her expression unreadable. But her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, darted toward me with a flicker of something I couldn't yet name. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart pounded in my chest, like a warning bell I was too slow to hear. "I've been living in this house." "The same house your father and I bought 30 years ago," I said softly. "There's never been any other house." Clarissa's voice was brittle when she spoke. "I'm sure there's been some kind of mistake. Maybe the paperwork got lost, but Daniel was already reaching for his phone, his fingers flying over the screen, pulling up emails, bank statements, documents. His face paled with every passing second. "I don't understand," he murmured. "I set up everything, the deed, the transfers. I sent the money, every month." I barely heard him. My eyes were locked on Clarissa, and in that moment, without anyone saying another word, I saw her mask slip. The glint of fear, the calculation, the unspoken knowledge that something she'd buried for 2 years was clawing its way to the surface. The room felt frozen in time. No one moved. No one spoke. And for the first time in my life, I realized I had no idea who my daughter-in-law truly was. I wasn't always alone. For most of my life, it was just me, my husband Thomas, and our only child Daniel. We weren't wealthy, but we were happy. Thomas taught history at the local high school. I spent my days among dusty shelves and old books at the library. Daniel grew up surrounded by stories, by values. We held close: kindness, honesty, hard work. When Thomas passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack 5 years ago, everything changed. The house we'd made a home for 3 decades suddenly felt cavernous. The silence after sunset stretched unbearably long. I thought I'd break, but Daniel stepped in the way any loving son would. He promised me, on the day we buried his father, that he would always take care of me no matter where life took him. Back then, he was still dreaming of building his own company. We used to sit on the porch wrapped in blankets, talking late into the night. He told me about his ideas, his hopes, his fears, and I listened, offering what little wisdom I could. When his company finally took off and he moved to California, I was nothing but proud. I encouraged him to chase his dreams, to live the life his father and I never had the chance to. We still called each other then every Sunday evening without fail. But over time, the calls stopped. At first, it was understandable: long hours, investor meetings, endless deadlines. Then came the IPO. Clarissa would send updates telling me Daniel was fine, working hard, thinking of me. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I never wanted to be a burden. So I told myself the distance was natural, necessary. What I didn't see, what I couldn't have imagined, was that distance being weaponized against me. And that the promise my son made to me on the worst day of our lives was being quietly, systematically broken without him even knowing. Clarissa Whitmore. Even now, saying her name aloud leaves a strange taste in my mouth. From the outside, she was the perfect addition to our family. Beautiful in a quiet, controlled way. The kind of woman who always knew the right thing to say at the right moment. Her laughter was delicate, her compliments always polite. And yet there was something about her that I could never fully grasp. I told myself I was being unfair, that it was the loneliness talking, that I was jealous maybe of her place in Daniel's heart. But it wasn't jealousy. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite name until it was too late. The first time I met her, I noticed the way her eyes scanned a room, not searching for connection, but for advantage. Small things stood out. She rarely asked about me unless Daniel was present. Her smiles didn't quite reach her eyes. Once, when I offered her my late husband's old coat to keep warm, something I treasured, she smiled politely, but her fingers recoiled as though the fabric itself offended her. Little things. Always little things. But Daniel was so happy. I saw the way his face lit up around her. I saw how she softened the hard edges of his ambition, how she laughed at his dry humor. So I told myself those little things didn't matter. They married 3 years ago in a quiet ceremony on the coast. Daniel had insisted on keeping it small. He said Clarissa didn't like big crowds. At the time, it felt intimate, thoughtful. Looking back, it feels like the first clue I missed. Over time, Clarissa became the gatekeeper of Daniel's life. When I called, it was she who answered. When I texted, it was she who replied. But her messages were always kind, always warm. "Daniel's thinking of you, Linda. He says to tell you he misses you. He wants you to know you'll always be taken care of." I believed every word. I wanted to. I had no idea that the woman I thought of as a daughter was slowly, meticulously stealing from me, stealing from the son who would have given me the world. Daniel's fingers moved quickly over his phone, the glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes. His brow furrowed deeper with every scroll, his lips pressed into a thin line. Clarissa stood behind him, her hands folded neatly, her expression frozen, but I could feel the tension radiating from her body, the rigid set of her shoulders, the way her breath caught in her throat. I knew then before a word was spoken that something was terribly wrong. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low. The house on Hillcrest Lane, the deed, the bank transfers. Everything's right here. He turned the screen toward me. There it was, my name, Margaret Linda Whitmore. The deed registered 2 years ago. The monthly bank transfers $2,000 every month without fail, except I had never seen a single dollar. I had never heard of Hillcrest Lane. My mouth went dry. "Daniel, I swear to you, I never received anything. I'm still living here. I stopped myself before I said too much. Before I admitted the small humiliations of my daily life rationing medication, skipping meals, living one step above desperation. Daniel shook his head, confused. "That doesn't make sense. The payments. They were supposed to help with everything. The house. I thought you were living there." I looked at Clarissa. For a moment our eyes met, and in that single moment something unspoken passed between us. A flicker of knowledge. A secret, buried but stirring. She cleared her throat. Maybe there was a mistake. We can check with the bank. Sometimes mail gets lost." Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her trembling ever so slightly. Daniel was already pulling up more documents, more confirmations. Each click, each tap of his finger seemed to unravel something deeper. "I don't understand," he muttered almost to himself. "I set everything up. The house, the transfers. Mom, I was trying to help. The room felt colder, the walls closer. And in that stillness, I realized this wasn't a simple mistake. This was the beginning of something I could barely comprehend. I felt the first sting of betrayal settle deep in my bones. I could see the confusion in Daniel's eyes hardening into something else, something colder, sharper. His fingers stopped moving over his phone. Slowly, he set it down on the table, his gaze fixed on Clarissa. The warmth in his face drained away, replaced by a tightness in his jaw. I had only seen once before, at his father's funeral, when he had fought to keep his composure as the world crumbled around him. "Clarissa," he said, his voice soft, but with an undercurrent of steel. "I need you to tell me exactly what's going on." Clarissa's smile, the practiced, polished smile I'd seen so many times, wavered. For a second I thought she might faint. She blinked rapidly, the tip of her tongue flicking out to wet her lips. Daniel, this has to be some kind of mix-up. I handled some of the paperwork for the house, but everything was supposed to go through your assistant. Maybe there was a clerical error. Or maybe the bank messed something up." Daniel's eyes narrowed. He didn't speak. He simply stared. Clarissa's hands twisted together. I thought the house was just symbolic. Your mother said she loved her current home. She told me she didn't want to move. I thought the financial transfers were just to help out. I didn't think she cut herself off," her voice cracking. I sat frozen, my hands resting in my lap. My heart thudded against my ribs, not with anger, but with something worse, dread. deep, hollow dread. Daniel's voice dropped lower. I never said anything about the house being symbolic. I transferred ownership. I sent money. Where did it go, Clarissa? She blinked again, her breath quickening. I need a minute, she whispered. Her eyes darted to me. Linda, can I talk to you for a moment? In private, I didn't move at first. For the briefest second, I wondered if I should refuse. But something in her eyes, something desperate and wild, made me push my chair back and rise. Daniel didn't stop us. He stayed seated, elbows on the table, hands laced tightly together, as if holding himself in place. Clarissa led me into the kitchen. The moment the door swung closed behind us, she let out a shaky breath, pressing her hands flat against the countertop. Gone was the serene, composed woman who had married my son. Before me stood someone frayed at the edges, her mask slipping with every passing second. Linda, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know what's happening. I swear I thought everything was handled. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe something got crossed. I can fix this, I said nothing. She turned toward me, her hands twisting together again. Daniel, he's been under so much stress. The IPO nearly broke him. I didn't want to bother him with little things, so I handled the details. I thought I was helping. I looked into her eyes. For the first time, I saw the cracks, the exhaustion, the fear. And still, something didn't add up. Clarissa, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. What exactly did you handle? Her breath caught. Just the transfers, the account numbers. It was supposed to be temporary. I meant to. She stopped, shaking her head as her eyes filled with unshed tears. I meant to fix it. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I studied her, my heart heavy. Somewhere deep down, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe this was a mistake. But I'd lived too many years, seen too much of human nature to fall for that now. The door creaked behind us. Daniel's voice, quiet but cold, carried through. We're not stopping until we find out the truth. Clarissa flinched. I stood straighter. And in that moment, I knew whatever had happened, whatever the reason, the truth was darker than any of us wanted to face. I remember the first time I saw Clarissa cry. It was almost 3 years ago during a rare weekend visit, when Daniel was away on a last-minute business trip. They had been married only a few months then, still in that newlywed phase where everything seemed polished and perfect. I had invited Clarissa to stay with me in Vermont, rather than spend the weekend alone in their cold, modern condo in Boston. At first, everything was as it always was, pleasant, polite, surface level. We made tea together in my tiny kitchen. She complimented my homemade apple pie. I asked about her work at the art gallery. She asked about the weather, safe topics, gentle smiles. That night, I woke in the middle of the night to get a glass of water. I padded softly through the hallway, not wanting to disturb anyone. That's when I heard its soft, muffled sobs coming from the guest room. I stood outside the door for a moment, hesitant. Part of me wanted to respect her privacy, but something maternal, something instinctive made me tap gently on the door and whisper her name. Clarissa, I murmured. Are you all right? There was a long pause. Then, in a small, broken voice, she answered, I'm fine, just couldn't sleep. I pushed the door open softly. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her head bowed, tissues crumpled in her lap. In the dim light, she looked fragile, like a child, pretending to be an adult. Her usual polish was gone. No makeup, no carefully curated expressions, just raw sadness. I crossed the room and sat beside her without a word. She didn't move away. I'm sorry, she whispered after a while, wiping her eyes. I don't know what's wrong with me. Daniel's just been so busy, and I guess I'm not used to being alone like this. I nodded gently, offering her a tissue. Marriage can be lonely sometimes, I said softly. especially when one person's chasing big dreams. She let out a small, hollow laugh. He's always chasing something. IPOs, investors, new markets. And I'm just here. We sat in silence after that. She didn't offer more, and I didn't push. In hindsight, I wonder if I should have. That night, I brought her a spare quilt and told her she could stay as long as she wanted. By morning, she was back to her composed self, smiling, graceful, immaculate. The moment seemed to dissolve like fog in the daylight. But it stayed with me. For months after, I thought of that night as a moment of quiet vulnerability, a sign that beneath her perfect exterior, Clarissa was human too. I told myself she was lonely, that she needed understanding. I even went out of my way to invite her more often to make sure she felt included in our family, to be the mother-in-law I thought she needed. But now, sitting in my kitchen with Daniel's hollow expression and Clarissa's frantic eyes burned into my mind, I began to see it differently. What if that night had not been about loneliness at all? What if the tears had been about something else entirely? I replayed the memory in my mind slower this time. The tension in her voice, the way she kept wiping her hands over and over like she was scrubbing something invisible away, the way she never quite met my eyes. Had I missed something? Had I been so eager to believe in the perfect image that I ignored what was right in front of me? I thought back to other moments, small things that had never felt important until now. The time she insisted on handling the birthday gift Daniel wanted to send me. The way she casually corrected me when I mentioned some detail Daniel had supposedly shared only to realize he hadn't. The subtle but constant way she had inserted herself as the filter between me and my son. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't obvious. It was like watching a painting change, one brush stroke at a time, imperceptible, until you stepped back and realized the entire picture was different. I felt cold inside. Not from the betrayal, I hadn't even processed the full weight of that yet, but from the realization that I had let it happen, that I had handed over the threads of my life, my relationship with my only son, without even noticing the knots forming beneath my fingers. Clarissa had cried once in this house. I had believed her tears. I had offered comfort. And now I sat in the same house wondering how much of any of it had ever been real. The moment we returned to the dining room, Daniel stood up with a quiet determination that unsettled me more than any raised voice could have. His expression had hardened into something I barely recognized, a man stripped of naivety standing face to face with betrayal. Without saying another word to Clarissa, he reached for his phone again and began dialing with swift, deliberate fingers. Clarissa hovered nearby, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face pale. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The air between us was already heavy with everything unsaid. I watched frozen as Daniel paced near the window, murmuring into the phone. He kept his voice low, but I caught fragments. I need you to pull everything, bank accounts, property deeds, urgent. I didn't know who he was calling until I heard him say the name Maria Alvarez. Maria had worked with Daniel's company years earlier, during a minor internal fraud investigation. I remembered him mentioning her once, a forensic accountant with a sharp eye and an even sharper instinct for uncovering hidden things. He had described her as someone who could find a needle in a haystack, even if you buried the haystack 6 feet underground. I sat down slowly at the edge of the table, my legs shaky beneath me. My fingertips traced the worn edges of the placemat without thought. The turkey sat untouched. The candles flickered gently, casting shadows on the walls, as if mocking the warmth I had tried so hard to create. Clarissa stayed near the door, her eyes darting between me and Daniel, her mouth pressed into a tight, bloodless line. She didn't say another word. The silence between us felt like glass, thin, fragile, and waiting to shatter. I folded my hands in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. The room that had once held decades of laughter, family dinners, late-night stories, and shared grief now felt foreign. It felt like someone else's house, Or worse, like a stage set where every memory had been carefully arranged for an audience that no longer existed. Daniel ended the call and finally looked at me. His voice was soft again, but not gentle. "Mom, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm not letting this go." I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. My throat was dry. Words felt useless. He rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes darting around the room as though seeing me for the first time. "I trusted her," he said quietly. "I thought she was family." The weight of that sentence crushed something in me. Clarissa broke the silence at last, her voice brittle. "Daniel, please. This is getting blown out of proportion. I'm sure Maria will find that it's just a mix-up. We can fix this." Daniel didn't even look at her. He turned back to me. "Maria's already pulling the financial records. I'll fly her in if I have to." I wanted to tell him it wasn't necessary. I wanted to tell him that this could all still be salvaged, that somehow Clarissa's tears had meaning, that not every unraveling ended in destruction. But I couldn't. Because deep down I knew. I had seen it in her eyes, in the way she held herself, in the trembling hands. There was no fixing this. There was only the truth and the wreckage it would leave behind. After a few more terse words between them, Daniel stepped outside to make another call. Clarissa retreated upstairs without a sound, and I sat there alone, in the fading light, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant wind outside. I stared down at my hands. They looked smaller somehow, older, fragile in a way I had never noticed before. The world as I knew it had begun to collapse, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't know how to put the pieces back together. The next few days passed in a blur. I barely slept. I barely ate. I moved through my house as if it were no longer mine, each room haunted by memories that now felt tainted hollow. Daniel kept his word. Maria Alvarez arrived within 48 hours, carrying a slim black laptop and an expression of quiet focus. She was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything, and a calm, deliberate way of speaking that somehow made me feel safer, even as the ground beneath my life continued to crumble. We gathered in my small living room, Daniel, Maria, and me, while Clarissa stayed conspicuously absent upstairs. The air was tense, brittle with anticipation. Maria opened her laptop, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she brought up document after document. "I pulled everything your assistant forwarded to me," she said, her voice low and measured. "And I'm afraid it's worse than we thought." She turned the screen toward us. The first thing I saw was my name, Margaret Linda Whitmore, on what looked like a bank statement. But the routing number and account number were unfamiliar. The address listed an apartment on Maple Street. Not my address, not my home. I felt cold all over. I cross-referenced the property deed. Maria continued, pulling up another file. "The Hill House transfer was real. The signature, however, is not yours." She zoomed in on the digital scan of the deed. My name, written in tidy script, was scrawled at the bottom. But even to my untrained eye, something was wrong. The way the loops curved, the missing flourish on the M. The signature was close enough to fool someone who wasn't looking too hard, but it wasn't mine. "I never signed this," I whispered. Maria nodded grimly. We compared it to previous signatures from tax filings and old documents. This was forged. Daniel exhaled sharply, running both hands through his hair. His face was a mixture of disbelief and fury. Maria went on, her tone clinical, but not unkind. The monthly payments Daniel authorized, every single one, was deposited into an account opened under your name, but with false information. The account was set up at a bank across the state, using a fake ID likely based on your real documents. I felt lightheaded, gripping the arm of my chair. "But how could they?" "She had access," Daniel said quietly, his voice strained. "Clarissa. She must have gotten into my files, or into the house, old tax returns, anything." Maria nodded again. It's not uncommon in cases like this. The perpetrator is usually someone close, someone with just enough knowledge to be dangerous. She clicked again, bringing up yet another file, this time showing the payment history. Month after month, the same deposit, the same bleeding away of money meant to keep me safe, comfortable, cared for. Each entry felt like a blade. I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of it pressing down on my chest. 2 years. 2 years of struggling while my son believed he was taking care of me. 2 years of sleepless nights of stretching dollars until they frayed, while somewhere out there someone was living off what should have been mine. Is there any doubt? Daniel asked, his voice hollow. Maria shook her head. None. The pattern is clear. The timing, the access, the forged documents. This was deliberate. The word deliberate echoed in my ears. I thought of Clarissa's tears, of her soft voice that night in the guest room, of every polite smile, every gentle hand on Daniel's arm. The small things I had dismissed, the moments I had told myself didn't matter. But they did matter. They always had. I felt something shift inside me then, a quiet, steady resolve. I wasn't angry, not yet. I wasn't broken. But I knew this, whatever came next. I wasn't going to sit quietly and fade into the background. I had been invisible long enough. The next revelation came faster than I expected. Maria worked like a machine, methodical, precise, tireless. By the following afternoon, she sat across from me and Daniel with a new set of findings that made my skin crawl. There's another name, she said quietly, her fingers resting on the edge of her laptop. The bank records show that some of the diverted funds didn't just stay in the fake account. Multiple transfers were made to a secondary account, one belonging to Evan Wright. I blinked, confused for a moment. The name meant nothing to me. Daniel, however, stiffened immediately. Clarissa's brother. He murmured, his jaw tightening. I met him twice. He barely spoke. Maria nodded. He's listed as the recipient of several large transfers over the last 18 months. The amounts vary, but they total just over $30,000, enough to suggest more than casual involvement. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. So she wasn't acting alone. No, Maria said gently. She wasn't. I let the words sink in. My hands trembled slightly in my lap. The betrayal was no longer isolated. It wasn't just Clarissa. It was wider, deeper, a conspiracy woven through quiet dinners, polite conversations, moments I had thought were genuine. I closed my eyes, and without meaning to, my mind drifted back to a memory I hadn't touched in years. That night 3 years ago in my guest room. Clarissa sitting on the edge of the bed, her tears glistening in the dim light. I remembered her words. I'm just not used to being alone. But now, with the weight of Maria's findings pressing on my chest, I saw it differently. It wasn't just sadness I had seen that night. It was calculation. And something else, too. Fear. I remembered the exact moment her eyes dimmed just for a heartbeat, as though something heavy flickered behind her pupils. I had dismissed it then, telling myself she was lonely, overwhelmed. I had offered comfort. I had offered warmth. I hadn't seen the rot growing underneath. Daniel's voice pulled me back. Evan has always been a mess, he said bitterly. Debt gambling. Clarissa told me she barely spoke to him after their father passed. She said he was toxic. I met my son's eyes, seeing the hurt in them. And you believed her, I said softly. He nodded, the shame clear on his face. I did. The pieces began to fall into place in my mind, not neatly, not all at once, but enough to see the shape of what had happened. Clarissa playing the dutiful wife. Evan drowning in his own bad choices. The money, my money, Daniel's money, had been the solution they thought they deserved. I tried to swallow the rising nausea. How could they do this? I whispered. To family, Daniel's shoulders slumped. Desperation makes people do things, Mom. But this is calculated. Maria leaned forward slightly. "We need to bring this to the authorities. The evidence is clear enough for a formal investigation." I nodded. Not because I wanted to, not because I relished the idea of police reports in courtrooms, but because I knew there was no other way forward. Somewhere upstairs, I heard the soft creak of floorboards. Clarissa. I wondered if she could feel the walls closing in. I wondered if she knew that every lie, every half-truth, every stolen dollar was being dragged into the Light One document at a time. For the first time, I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. The woman I had once comforted as she cried in the dark was gone. Or maybe she had never been there to begin with. And all that remained now was the truth. The confrontation happened late in the evening, long after the daylight had vanished, and the weight of the day pressed heavy on my bones. Clarissa came downstairs, her footsteps hesitant, her face drawn and colorless. She didn't look like the poised woman I had known for years. She looked hollow, stripped of pretense, unraveling at the seams. Daniel sat rigid on the couch, his phone still in his hand, Maria's files open on the coffee table. He didn't look up when she entered. I remained seated at the dining table, my hands resting quietly in my lap, my heart a dull, distant ache. Clarissa stood in the doorway for a moment, her eyes darting between us. Then her voice, small broken, finally spoke. "Please," she whispered. "I can explain." Daniel exhaled sharply but said nothing. The air was thick with the weight of everything unspoken. Finally, she took a few faltering steps closer and collapsed onto the edge of the armchair. Her hands shook as she covered her face. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't set out to hurt anyone. I didn't know what else to do." She pulled her hands away, and for the first time I saw real tears glistening in her eyes. Not the practiced tears of manipulation, but something messier. Raw. "Evan," she whispered, "he was in trouble. Real trouble. He owed money to people I can't even name. They threatened him, Daniel. They said they'd kill him. They showed up at his apartment with guns. They broke his ribs. He called me in the middle of the night begging for help." Her voice caught on the last word, her shoulders heaving. I watched her closely. Every instinct in me fought to hold on to my anger to the betrayal. But her pain, it wasn't entirely false. That much I could see. Clarissa wiped her cheeks, her hands trembling. "I asked you for help. Remember 6 months after your father passed, I asked if you could send something for my family, just to get them through the worst of it. You were so distracted. The IPO was all you talked about. And I thought I could handle it myself, just temporarily." Daniel's eyes were cold as steel. "So you stole from my mother." Clarissa flinched as if he had struck her. "I didn't mean for it to last. I thought once Evan was safe, I'd fix it. I'd put the money back. But then the payments kept coming, and Evan kept spiraling. I couldn't stop it. I didn't know how." Her voice broke entirely then, and she buried her face in her hands. I sat very still. My heart twisted painfully. The image of her that night sitting on the edge of my guest bed with silent tears, suddenly it made sense. The weight behind her sadness, the fear I had glimpsed but not understood. I swallowed. "Clarissa," I said softly, "why didn't you just tell us?" She shook her head violently. "Because I was ashamed. Because I thought if I just fixed it quietly, no one would have to know. I was so afraid of losing everything, of losing him." Her voice faded into a whisper. Daniel sat frozen, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his words were cold. "Final." "You didn't just lose him, Clarissa. You destroyed us." Silence filled the room like smoke. I looked at her one last time. All I could see now was a woman undone by her own desperation, her lies built not from malice, but from fear, from the misguided love of a sister who had long since lost her way. But none of that erased the choices she had made. None of it gave her the right to steal the life I should have had. Clarissa's sobs filled the room long after Daniel's words faded into the stillness. She clutched her hands together, her face streaked with tears, her breath coming in shallow, broken gasps. I sat perfectly still, my fingers resting on the smooth grain of the dining table, my heart strangely calm. I didn't speak. Not at first. The weight of what she had done, what they had done, settled over me like a blanket of cold ash. And yet there was no anger left in me. No heat. Only something quieter, deeper. The quiet ache of something that couldn't be undone. "Please," Clarissa whispered, her voice barely more than breath. "Please, Linda. I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you. I didn't mean for it to spiral like this. I was drowning. Evan was drowning." I thought her voice cracked again, and she pressed her palms to her face. Daniel said nothing. He stood near the window, his expression carved from stone, his eyes distant. The man I had raised, the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms, stood broken by betrayal, not just of his mother, but of his marriage, of his faith in people. Clarissa turned to me, then her eyes red, desperate. "I'll make it right," she whispered. "I swear, I'll pay it back. Every penny. Just please don't let this be the end of everything." I studied her for a long moment. The flicker of her mascara-smeared eyes, the shaking of her hands, the way her voice trailed off into hopelessness. And I realized something quietly devastating. She wasn't lying now. Not anymore. Every ounce of her was laid bare. But it didn't matter. Some damage is beyond repair. I took a slow breath, steadying the tremble in my hands. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, even, and somehow that made it sharper. "You didn't just take money," I said softly, my eyes never leaving hers. "You took something I can never get back." She froze. "You took my trust." The words hung in the air between us, gentle but final. Clarissa shook her head helplessly. "I never meant to." But I raised one hand, stopping her. "I know," I murmured. "That's the saddest part." She pressed her knuckles to her lips, her eyes filling again. The tears this time weren't performative. They were real, but they couldn't change the truth. Daniel turned away, his jaw clenched tight. He didn't speak, but I could feel the sorrow radiating off him. The betrayal didn't just belong to me, it belonged to both of us. I thought of the long, lonely winters I had endured in this house, the unpaid heating bills, the quiet prayers at night, wondering if I'd made a mistake letting my son fly so far from home. And all the while, he had been trying to take care of me. He had trusted the woman he loved to carry out that promise. And she had buried it all beneath her fear, her desperation, her lies. Clarissa dropped her hands. Her voice, when it came again, was barely audible. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I didn't do it out of hate." I gave her the smallest of nods. "I know," I said again, my voice soft. But intention doesn't erase consequence. The silence that followed was vast. It pressed in on all sides, suffocating. Finally, I rose from my chair, my hands steady now. "You should go upstairs," I said quietly. "I think we all need time." Clarissa hesitated, her eyes searching mine for something, mercy maybe, or absolution. But I had nothing left to give. She turned and left without another word. I stood alone in the soft lamplight, the house so still I could hear the wind moving outside. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt something settle inside me. Not revenge, not rage, but the quiet certainty that some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed. The decision to press charges was Daniel's. I didn't ask for it. I didn't demand it. I sat quietly as he spoke to the lawyer, his voice low, steady, unwavering. The man who once hated conflict, the boy who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on a bug, stood taller than I'd ever seen him. Whatever tenderness remained between him and Clarissa had been severed, cleanly, finally. Maria provided every scrap of evidence, the forged documents, the fake bank accounts, the digital trail, that left no room for denial. There was no hiding from the truth anymore. Clarissa didn't resist. When the officers came, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't protest. She stepped forward, her wrists offered almost willingly, as the cold steel of the handcuffs snapped shut. She kept her head bowed, her blonde hair falling like a curtain across her face. The image seared into my memory. The woman who once sat at my table, who toasted to family and love, now standing in silence, hands bound while her life unraveled around her. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. I felt empty. Daniel stood beside me on the porch as the police car pulled away. His face was unreadable, his eyes dark. Neither of us spoke for a long time. She made her choices. He said finally, his voice hoarse, "We can't unmake them for her." I nodded. There was nothing else to say. Evan was harder to find. For days, he vanished, no credit card activity, no cell phone pings, no sightings. But desperation leaves traces, and the authorities followed every thread. He was caught trying to cross state lines traveling under a false name. His arrest made local headlines. Another layer of humiliation added to a story that already felt surreal. I watched the news coverage in silence, the images of Evan handcuffed, disheveled, defiant. He didn't look like the monster people made him out to be. He looked small, pathetic, just another person who had let fear and greed consume him. When the trial date was announced, Daniel offered to handle everything. He didn't want me anywhere near the courtroom. He said it was about protecting me, but I knew the truth. He didn't want me to see how far the people we once called family had fallen. I agreed. The night after Clarissa's arrest, I sat alone in my kitchen, the same kitchen where all of this had begun. The teacup in my hands trembled slightly, though I wasn't cold. I stared out the window into the dark, the soft glow of the porch light illuminating the frost on the glass. I wasn't sure what I felt. Grief, maybe. Not for the loss of money or the stolen house, but for something harder to name. The loss of innocence, the loss of safety, the quiet, unspoken belief that people, especially those we love, would never truly betray us. Clarissa's bowed head stayed with me. Not her tears, not her pleas, just that single moment of stillness when she seemed to fold in on herself, as if she finally understood what she had become. I set the cup down carefully, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And in that stillness, I promised myself I would survive this. Somehow, I would rebuild not just my life, but the trust I had once given so freely. A week after Clarissa's arrest, I sat with Maria at my dining table, the same table where so much of this had unraveled. The house was quiet, unnervingly so, and the snow outside dusted the windowsills in soft, delicate layers. It should have felt peaceful. It didn't. Spread across the table were printed statements, bank records, forged documents, rows and rows of numbers and names that no longer blurred together. Now they told a story line by line, each one a breadcrumb leading back to betrayal. Maria, ever patient, walked me through them again. She didn't rush. She explained each transfer, each inconsistency, each lie hidden in plain sight. I watched her fingertips trace across the pages, circling account numbers, highlighting signatures. I had asked for this. I needed to understand. I needed to see it for myself, not just hear about it, not just accept the outcome, but look it in the face and know the truth I had once been blind to. This is the first transfer, Maria murmured, pointing to a date that now felt like a lifetime ago, 2 years back. It matches the month Daniel thought you received the house. I nodded slowly. And the account. She gently tapped the name at the top. My name, but not my account. I studied it in silence, my eyes moving over each figure. The monthly deposits, the quiet thefts. The amounts were so precise, never extravagant, never enough to trigger alarms, just enough to be unnoticed, just enough to seem ordinary. And I had missed it all. I thought back to those years, how I had struggled, how I had rationed my medication, how I had convinced myself that Daniel was too busy to check in, that it wasn't my place to ask for more. But the signs had been there. The delayed texts, the carefully worded emails, the way Clarissa always managed to answer for Daniel, always inserted herself between us, with a polite smile and gentle reassurances. I swallowed hard, my fingers brushing against one of the forged deeds. The signature so close to mine, yet wrong, in ways I hadn't seen before. I felt something sharp twist in my chest. Not anger, not entirely. Regret, maybe, for being so willing to believe in comfort when I should have questioned the silence. Maria's voice softened. You couldn't have known. I gave her a faint smile. But I could have seen, I whispered. I could have asked. She said nothing, offering only the quiet presence of someone who understood that some lessons come too late. We moved through the rest of the paperwork together, page after page, until the story was complete. Every deception mapped out, every falsehood laid bare, the entire architecture of betrayal revealed in black and white. When we finished, I sat back, my hands resting on the table's edge. My heart was heavy, but for the first time I felt clear. I knew now, I saw now, all the small moments I had brushed aside, all the unease I had buried beneath politeness, all the red flags I had dismissed in the name of family. They were all here, written plainly. And this time, I wasn't looking away. Maria gathered the papers into a neat stack. She didn't rush me. She simply waited as I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I met her eyes and said quietly, "This won't happen again." And I meant it. It was the quiet that brought him to me. The house had settled into a stillness I hadn't felt in years. No footsteps, no whispered lies, no tension humming beneath the surface. Clarissa was gone. Evan was in custody. The wreckage of what had been our life lay around us, but for the first time it felt still. Daniel came in without a word, his coat still on his shoulders, heavy with exhaustion that seemed to seep from his bones. He dropped into the chair beside me, his hands limp in his lap. For a long while, neither of us spoke. I poured him a cup of tea, setting it in front of him without ceremony. He gave me a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes, and murmured, "Thanks, Mom." We sat like that for what felt like forever. The winter wind brushed softly against the windows, the faint crackle of the fireplace, the only sound between us. Finally, he broke the silence. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "I don't even know where to start." I turned to him gently. "You don't have to," I whispered. "It's done now." But he shook his head, his jaw clenching. His eyes were red, whether from sleepless nights or quiet tears, I couldn't tell. "No," he said quietly. "I need to say this." He took a shaky breath, and then without warning, he leaned forward and rested his head against my shoulder. The weight of him, my son, my child, now a grown man burdened with too much, settled against me, like it had when he was small, when the world was simpler, and comfort was easy to give. I held my breath, my hand instinctively moving to rest on his back. I thought he murmured, his voice barely audible, that if I built something big enough, successful enough, I could make everything right. I thought money could fix what we lost, what I couldn't face. His words cracked under the weight of old grief. "I kept telling myself I was taking care of you," he continued softly. "But the truth is, I never asked what you really needed. I didn't see you. I didn't see what was happening. I let her. His voice broke. I let her steal not just your security, but my promise to you. I closed my eyes, my throat tightening. For so long, I had imagined this moment what I would say if he ever truly saw me, if he ever looked past the polite distance, and realized how close I had come to falling apart. But sitting there with his head on my shoulder, I realized words weren't what mattered. I stroked his hair gently the way I used to when he was a boy, and said softly, "You're here now." He exhaled a shaky breath, his body trembling against mine. For a while we said nothing more. There was no need. The words were there unspoken, but real. He didn't need to fix the past. He didn't need to erase what had happened. All I needed was this to be seen, to be known, to not be invisible anymore. The tea went cold on the table. And for the first time in years, my son let me hold him the way he once had when he believed without question that his mother would always be there. In that moment, despite the broken pieces, I felt something steady return to me, something no amount of betrayal could ever truly steal. Love. The news spread faster than I could have imagined. In a town as small as Ashford, secrets don't stay buried long. By the end of the week, everyone knew. The betrayal, the stolen money, the arrests. My name, once tucked safely into quiet anonymity, now floated from whispers in grocery store aisles to hushed conversations at the post office. I became quite unintentionally the wealthy old lady of the town. People treated me differently. Some were kind, overly so. They stopped me in the street, their voices thick with sympathy, their hands brushing my arm as they said things like, "You're so brave," or "You deserve every bit of comfort now." Others weren't unkind, but distant, their smiles tight, their eyes darting away as if unsure what to say to someone who had been publicly betrayed by her own family. And then there were those who looked at me with something colder, envy perhaps, or suspicion. As though the simple fact of having money, no matter how painfully acquired, had transformed me into someone else, someone they no longer recognized. I heard the whispers. They say she's sitting on close to 100 grand now. Imagine living that poor for years when your son was sending money the whole time. I heard she's buying a new car. None of it was true. I still walked to the corner store. I still clipped coupons out of habit. The money sat untouched, carefully managed by Daniel and Maria, waiting for when I might truly need it. I had spent so long learning to live with less, it felt unnatural to suddenly have more. The hardest part wasn't the attention. It was the way people started to rewrite my story without asking. I became a symbol of something I didn't want to be, a woman who had won through misfortune. As if the comfort of a house of money, of safety, could erase the nights I'd gone without heat, without food, without peace. I learned to smile through it, to thank people politely, to let the comments roll past me. But inside, I felt detached, adrift in a life that no longer fit the shape of who I was. The truth is, I didn't want to be seen as the wealthy woman, or the victim, or the heroine. I just wanted to be Linda, the woman I had been before all this. And I wasn't sure if that was even possible anymore. Clarissa was sentenced on a Tuesday morning under cold gray skies. I didn't attend the hearing. Daniel went along with Maria and the attorneys. I stayed home sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the wind stir the bare branches of the old maple tree in the yard. The text came from Daniel just after noon, 18 months, fraud, identity theft. She pled guilty. I stared at the words for a long time. I felt no joy, no sense of victory, only stillness, like the last page of a book closing softly in my hands. Later, Daniel told me that Clarissa had shown little emotion in court. She stood quietly answering questions in short, controlled sentences. No tears, no outbursts, just resignation. He said she looked smaller somehow, dimmed. Evan too faced charges. His case was messier layers of prior offenses, a string of debts, a history of petty fraud that now caught up with him in full force. His own family, Daniel said, had cut ties. His name, like hers, became a cautionary tale. I tried to summon anger, tried to feel the sharp sting of betrayal that had fueled me in the early days after the truth surfaced. But it wasn't there anymore. What I felt instead was grief. Not for them, but for the people they could have been, for the trust that had been lost, for the years I couldn't get back. I thought of Clarissa's eyes that day in my kitchen, when she whispered that she only wanted to save her brother. I thought of the weight she must have carried, the choices that must have unraveled one by one until she could no longer find her way back. And I thought of myself, of the woman who had once believed in her, who had once welcomed her into this home without reservation. That woman was gone. I was someone else now. When Daniel came home that evening, we didn't speak of the sentencing. We cooked dinner together quietly the way we used to before life complicated itself. The soft clatter of dishes, the smell of roasted chicken, the gentle music of normalcy filling the air. And for the first time, I understood not every ending needs noise. Not every wound demands revenge. Some things end with silence, and that too is enough. Spring came late that year. The frost clung to the ground longer than usual, but when the thaw finally arrived, it felt like the air itself shifted gentler, softer, full of beginnings I didn't yet understand. Daniel suggested we start with the garden. It had fallen into neglect over the years, brambles creeping through the fence-line, weeds overtaking the flower beds. But there was still life beneath it all, still roots waiting. One Saturday morning, he arrived with gloves, shovels, and a quiet smile. "Thought we could fix this place up," he said simply. We worked side by side in the soft dirt, the sun warming our backs. We planted daffodils, trimmed hedges, pulled weeds that had long since claimed the edges of the yard. There were no grand speeches, no forced conversations, just the rhythm of hands in soil, the slow, steady work of putting something broken back together. It felt good, real. Maria visited from time to time. What began as professional necessity became genuine friendship. She brought coffee, shared stories from her own life, helped me navigate the complexities of financial recovery with a patience that made me trust her in a way I hadn't thought possible again. We sat on the porch often, the three of us, Daniel, Maria, and me, watching the lake glitter in the distance, the wind stirring the trees. I no longer woke with dread in my chest. The quiet that once felt oppressive now felt peaceful. The house, the one that had been at the heart of so much pain, slowly became mine in truth, not just in deed, but in spirit. I filled it with small joys, fresh flowers, handwritten letters, books piled on every surface, the ordinary things that made a life. Clarissa's name rarely came up, Evan's even less. Their absence became another kind of stillness, one I had made peace with. One evening, as Daniel poured wine and Maria laughed at something I'd said, I caught a glimpse of who we had been before everything broke and who we were becoming now. Different, but whole in a new way. I smiled softly to myself, and I knew I had survived. The day I moved into Hill House, the sky was the clearest shade of blue I'd seen in years. I stood at the foot of the driveway, the keys, cold in my hand. The house rising in front of me, calm, dignified, untouched by the chaos that had surrounded it for so long. The windows gleamed in the soft sunlight. The wraparound porch stretched wide and opened the lake beyond, shimmering like glass. For a long while, I didn't move. I simply stood there, breathing it in. I thought of the first time Daniel told me about the house, how he wanted me to live somewhere peaceful, somewhere that felt like a reward for all the hard years. At the time, I smiled, grateful, but deep down, I never truly believed it would happen. Not for someone like me. Even now, with the keys in my hand, with my name on the deed, it felt surreal. I closed my eyes, and without meaning to, memories surfaced. I was younger, barely 30, standing outside a tiny rented apartment with Thomas. We were newly married, broke, and so in love we could hardly breathe for it. I remembered the way we used to dream aloud, walking down streets lined with houses we couldn't afford, pointing and imagining. That one maybe. Someday. We never reached someday. Life as it does pulled us in other directions. Bill's work raising Daniel. We made do. We made memories. But we never made it here. I opened my eyes again, the weight of time pressing softly against my chest. And yet, I wasn't sad. The me who had once stood on those distant streets would never have imagined this moment. She would never have pictured herself here alone, but unbroken, standing before a house she had earned not through money, but through sheer endurance. I took the first step up the path. The front door creaked open easily, and the warmth of the afternoon sun followed me in. The house smelled of fresh paint, lavender, and old wood. Empty rooms waited full of possibility. High ceilings, soft light windows that caught the glint of water beyond the trees. I set my bag down in the entryway and walked through the rooms slowly, my fingertips trailing along the walls. Each step felt lighter, each breath deeper. This was mine now, not as a prize, not as compensation, but as a home. Later that evening, after Daniel helped carry in the last of the boxes, and Maria left with a soft smile and a wave, I stood alone in the living room, the golden haze of sunset flooding through the windows. I poured a glass of wine and stepped out onto the porch. The lake was still, the wind soft. Somewhere in the distance, birds called to each other in the fading light. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling the quiet seep into my bones. This wasn't the life I had once imagined. It wasn't the life I would have chosen. But it was mine. And standing there beneath the wide-open sky, I whispered to the younger version of myself, the girl who used to dream of something more. We made it. In our own way, we made it. It was late when I finally sat down to write the letter. The house was quiet, only the soft ticking of the old clock and the rustle of the wind against the windows kept me company. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting gentle shadows along the walls. I didn't write it because I wanted closure. I didn't write it because I wanted her forgiveness. I wrote it because there were words inside me that needed somewhere to go. And though Clarissa would never read them, they belonged to me now. I took a deep breath and began. Clarissa, I wrote, the pen steady in my hand. I'm not writing to forgive you. That isn't something I can give. And truthfully, I don't believe it's something you're asking for anymore. I'm writing because despite everything, despite the lies, the theft, the unraveling of a family I thought was whole, I know that no one wakes up one morning and decides to become what you became. I think of that night years ago when you sat in my guest room and cried. I didn't understand then. I'm not sure I ever fully will. But I saw a glimpse of something I can't quite forget. Fear, desperation, a kind of sadness that ran too deep to explain. You hurt me. You took from me things I can't get back: my security, my trust. The simple belief that the people closest to me would never use me as a means to an end. But you also reminded me of something I had forgotten, that even in the darkest moments I have the right to rebuild, to begin again. I hope someday, when you face the weight of your choices, you find the strength to forgive yourself. Because I won't carry this with me. Not anymore. I set the pen down my hands, oddly steady. The words felt right, not angry, not vengeful, just true. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into an envelope, and placed it in the drawer of the old writing desk in the front room. I didn't seal it. I didn't address it. It wasn't meant to be sent. It was meant to be said. The wind outside stirred again, rattling the porch swing gently. I sat back in the chair, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the peace of the house wrap around me. For the first time in years, my heart felt quiet. Some stories don't end with justice or revenge. Some stories end with release, and that I realized was enough. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you. I never thought I would tell this story. I never thought I would speak these words aloud, let alone share them with strangers across time and distance. But if there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's this. We are not the things that happen to us. We are the choices we make after. For a long time, I let betrayal define me. I let fear shrink my world. I told myself I was small, powerless, forgotten. I believed, without even realizing it, that I was trapped inside a story someone else had written for me. But the truth is, none of us are prisoners forever. It doesn't matter who lied to you, who left you, who took from you things you thought you couldn't live without. It doesn't matter how deep the hurt runs or how long you've carried it. What matters, what always matters, is what you do next. You can choose to stay broken. You can let bitterness write the final chapter. Or you can begin again. I won't tell you it's easy. Letting go of anger doesn't happen overnight. Trusting again, trusting yourself takes time. Yourself. Some days, the weight of it still brushes against me when I least expect it. A memory, a scent, a quiet moment alone. But I've learned to breathe through it. I've learned that peace doesn't come when justice is served. Peace comes when you decide the past doesn't own you anymore. Some people ask me, why didn't I seek revenge? Why didn't I drag her name through the mud? Why didn't I shout my pain from the rooftops? And the answer is simple. Because revenge would have made me someone I didn't want to be. I wasn't meant to be the woman who stayed angry forever. I wasn't meant to spend the rest of my life in the shadow of what was done to me. I was meant to live, to grow, to fill my days with quiet joys, with real connections, with love, not in spite of what happened, but because I chose not to let it define me. If you've been betrayed, if someone shattered your trust, hear me when I say this. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not powerless. And you are not a victim unless you choose to remain one. Your story isn't over. Not yet. You get to choose how it ends. Whether that ending is written in bitterness or in peace, whether you carry the weight of old wounds or lay them down, that choice belongs to you. And it always has. I chose peace, and I hope when you're ready you will too. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee in your hands, or a late night where stories like this keep you company while the world sleeps? Let me know in the comments. I read every word with gratitude and I carry them with me. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just for more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And I hope you remember sometimes the miracle you've been waiting for doesn't knock, it waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.